It's Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers with tips and advice on landscaping and gardening. Here's Fernando Martinez.
Yes, I am here, and welcome to the show. Yes, I've got another exciting Patio Side Chats to bring to you today. Today's topic is mostly I want to talk about sprinklers. And the reason is I've had a couple experiences this week on sprinklers and this hot weather kind of summer thing, which I really kind of goes across all the seasons once you start thinking about coverage and, you know, which heads are at the end of the line and most likely to clog. I want to talk about low flow heads versus high flow heads and kind of just go over the whole like sprinkler, mostly for lawns. I think is pretty important if you have grass to save water and to still have a green lawn, and especially during the heat of the summer, and when to, you know, supplement with a hose just for a week or so, you know, just to not be programming the clock so much. So yeah, I wanted to go over that. And I also wanted to talk about a little bit about pavers too. So kind of a mixed show today. And I wanted to, on the paver part, talk about some patterns, colors, borders, because we've had some experiences on that as well this week. So let's dive right on into it. Let's start out with sprinklers and kind of talk about mostly I want to focus on summer, what happens to the schedule and what happens to the lawn and how we can really prevent dry spots from happening in grass and giving some sections so they don't have too much water in one, or you're programming the clock a lot. I think ideally, I mean, I say this a lot on this show, is what you want to do is be programming your clock 3 to 4 times a year. If you don't have any kind of smart timers or, you know, what they call like weather stations or weather sensors or, you know, rain sensors, things like that. If it's strictly a rain sensor, you're still going to be programming the timer. You just don't have to go and turn the clock off when it's raining. And the off button is a really good thing to use. And you could essentially even program it sometimes just doing that. It takes a little bit more work, where if you don't know how to program the clock, like kind of a last ditch resort would be to just turn it off. And then when things look dry, turn it back on. But during the summer, you could drive yourself crazy trying to program the clock on a weekly basis, because the temperature swings can get kind of radical during the summer months, and there could be a week. You know, it's that thing. I always think like, oh, we're gonna get air conditioning in our house, you know, this year, because that one week where it gets really hot, and then the week goes by, and then I don't think about it anymore. We never do buy the air conditioning unit, and you know, then it comes around next year again. And this year it seemed to be a couple of weeks. They can come out of nowhere and it can happen again, you know, and so it really takes its toll on the lawns, and most of us aren't ready for it, you know, with as far as the programming of the timer is concerned. And so I want you to think about, if you do have some sort of, like, I use a solar sync at my house, which is kind of a device that helps program the clock. But even that, it's still not perfect. I still have to go out there and make sure that it's doing the job it's supposed to be doing. And if you don't have a smart device, it's going to be totally up to you to up the watering. I think you can save water. It's kind of counterintuitive, but you can really save water by increasing the amount of water that you put out if you do it at the right times of the year, because it takes way more water to bring a dead, you know, well, it's not dead, but to bring a brown patch in your grass back than it would if you increased it ahead of time and gave it enough water during the heat spell. And then you don't have to waste the water bringing it back and soaking it with the hose and things like that. So I went out, we had a call back on a sprinkler system, and this was exactly what was going on. There were dry spots, and, you know, the customer's not sure. Is it that the heads aren't covering correct? We don't have head-to-head coverage. Is it, you know, the nozzle's not working properly? You know, is this area getting more sun, another area's getting shaded? You know, and it's never, honestly, it's never one thing. I've yet to go out, to a job site and diagnose something and say, okay, it's just one thing. There it is. That's what the problem was. It's always, 9 times out of 10, it's a combination of things. And so what I found out was in her case, and this is kind of what I wanted to make this radio show out of today, because in speaking with this client, it brought it to my forefront of my mind, kind of, sprinklers 101. And what do we think about when we build a system? And, hopefully your system is, if it's existing, what they call head-to-head coverage, and there's proper even distribution of the water from head to head. Now, if you're building a new system, make sure that you install it that way. Now, even in ideal conditions, and I made the example of, let's say you go inside a basketball gym, completely enclosed, and you put a square 15 by 15 of grass, and you put one 15-foot head in each one of the 4 corners, and they all sprayed towards each other. No wind, nothing. Completely ideal conditions, ideal coverage. There's going to be some spots on that lawn, and you can graph it out, that all 4 heads will hit. There's going to be some areas where 3 heads will hit, and there's going to be some areas where only 2 heads hit. Those are the weak spots in the sprinkler system, is where it's the least amount of water being put down. And that's in ideal conditions. So there's no such thing as a perfect irrigation system. Every irrigation system by design has weak spots. So how you set your watering schedule is based on those weak spots. As soon as those weak spots, those areas in my scenario where there's only 2 heads covering, when those areas got enough water, that's how long you run the system for. And how fast it dries out is how many days you have to water. You have to replenish back. If it takes a day, 2 days, and that increases during the summer months. So we had a client that was watering every day, 20 minutes, and was still getting dry spots. So I went out to investigate, and there were some issues. And I think that this is apparent in all systems that things can go wrong, and you can either compensate with way too much water or, fix things correctly and use the appropriate amount of water and get them fixed. So there is a difference in nozzles. Now, I've been using what we call MP rotators for a long time, and I've been using them since they first came out. I love them. They're absolutely wonderful heads. And so compared to regular sprays, they're much more efficient. They use less water, but you do have to get used to longer run times. So the 20 minutes, what does that mean when someone's watering 20 minutes? Well, it depends on what type of nozzle you're using. How much water is actually coming out? Am I putting out 4 gallons a minute, or am I putting out half a gallon a minute? It makes so you can't just say, well, I'm watering 20 minutes, that should be long enough. You have to know what types of nozzles you have and some idea how many gallons per minute is coming out of that head, so you can calculate, how much water you're using. So, if a head's putting out 2 gallons a minute, and like a spray head and a half, and then one of these MP rotators is putting out 0.8 gallons per minute, obviously you're going to have to let that head run longer and get used to the longer run times so that you can get enough water on there. You could run that head, because we have no problem running the 2 gallon an hour head, which is regular sprays, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, sounds perfectly fine. But to get the same amount of water out of a low flow nozzle like an MP rotator, you'd have to water 30 minutes, 40 minutes to get the same amount of water out. So longer run times sound really bad, and it sounds like you're wasting a lot of water. But if you're not putting out the gallons per minute, you can, in some cases, be using less water with a longer run time. So be careful of that and understand what it is that you're doing. Now, also, I know that there's going to be a weak spot in every system like we talked about. So her weak spot was at the end of the lawn where the end of the lines were. Well, there's also a tendency for any sprinkler heads that are at the ends of the lines to get any of the sediment and little grains of sand and silt that are in the line, they get sent down to the last head and kind of collect there, because as dirt gets in the line, and even back siphonage, as the heads pop back down into the ground, they can suck in, little bits and pieces of dirt and sand and dust or whatever. And then they'll come on, and when they shut off, they all settle at the bottom of the pipe. And then when the sprinklers turn on again, that water is obviously pushing out towards the ends of the heads, and things tend to collect there. Also, it was the sunniest spot of her lawn. The lawn was coming out in the sun and going along the walk, and then it turned kind of to the left, and it went back under some trees where it was shadier. That length of time for the sprinkler system was fine for the shadier areas, but this weak spot was due to the sun hitting it way more, and the fact that the nozzles were slightly clogged. They weren't clogged all the way, but I could tell by looking at it, they weren't spraying the same amount of water out as the other heads. And then you've got this hot weather that had come on, and that's really where your dry spots get identified. So when hot weather comes and you get that week of the year where you're thinking, man, we need to get some AC unit for our house, or maybe you're lucky enough you've already got one and you're actually turning it on for that week. I want you to look at your lawns and see and to get to know it like you would anything, and say, okay, well, every year right here, because that's where your weak zones are. And that's really one of the easiest ways to figure out where the weak spots are is during that week when it's really hot. And they'll show you, and then you now know where they are. So look for maybe shrubs that grew in front of a head, anything ground cover that could get in there and kind of block. Even the slightest blocking of the pattern of the spray can create a lot of water right in front of the head and cause that grass to get taller, which will block the nozzle even further. And remember, the heads, the areas that are right around the heads, that is not that head's responsibility for watering. Sprinklers spray out, away from themselves. They spray over to the other head. That's why they call it head-to-head coverage. So if you're seeing a dry spot and you've got 12, 15 foot, all your sprinklers are maybe 12, 15 feet apart, if you're standing in one area where the dry spot is, look 12 to 15 feet away from where you are. It's those sprinkler heads' responsibilities to water that area, not the head that's right next to it. So remember that, and think about knowing where the weak zones are in your system, and think about how you're going to address it, either by, and in some cases it is where you put a 15-foot nozzle and it's 17 feet from the other head, and you're always having a dry spot there. You can change the nozzle, you can add a head, get those problems fixed first, then check and make sure that there's no sediment, screens aren't clogged, nozzles aren't spraying correctly. Even if they're still spraying but not spraying correctly, it's very important. Or if something's blocking the head, even if it's just a little bit, again, very important, because it ends up making a big difference in the long run. Then you can get those problems fixed, get everything spraying right, making sure that you have head-to-head coverage. You're still going to have a weak spot there. What I do for my weak zones is I get the hose out and I soak it with a hose for that week. And I don't even have to touch the clock. I don't have to reprogram anything. And by the next week, it's right back to the same program it was on, where everything was looking fine before the hot week. So hose watering is actually the best way to bring back a dry spot, not by upping all the sprinklers to try to get that one brown spot to come back, or if you have a couple hot spots. Taking the hose out there, soaking it down is going to come back much faster, much easier, and without necessarily programming the clock. You can always put a few more minutes on there, because if the rest of the lawn, could use a little more water, that's fine, of course. But don't go extreme on the program to try to bring back one dry spot. It's much better to get the hose out there and do it that way. So I hope this helps. I hope we're, thinking about having wonderful, beautiful green lawns without dry spots, and being able to do it in a way that's smart, still being able to use low flow nozzles. And that's the thing I wanted to say about the MP rotators, is they're awesome in so many ways. And if there is a downside to them. It's that they have very tiny little orifices, and they have it's like a double pop. So the sprinkler pops up, and then the MP rotator does another little pop up, and that spins around. And so they are susceptible to very small pieces of dirt or little grain of sand or something gets in the way in there, and they don't spray right. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, look them up. MP rotators, they're low flow nozzles. They're easily changed if you have the old style sprays, which have been around for a long time, and they certainly work. The good part about sprays, they put out a lot of water really fast. So when you are trying to bring back, some lawn, it can be helpful. The MP rotators, seems like you can leave it on forever. They never flood the lawn because they're just putting out water so slowly. They're giving the soil time to absorb it. They self-compensate as you open them up. They are covering more area. They spin faster. They put more water out. I could go on and on about them. They're really amazing little nozzles. If there is a downside to them, though, it is this, that they clog. Not all the way like you would think of a clog, but just enough to where it messes up their spray ever so slightly. They even it takes kind of a keen eye too, because they look like they're still working, but I know better. And I was able to point it out to the client I was talking to. And really the solution is they have this silver ring on the top, and you just go around. And I know that other companies make them too, and the ring may not be silver, but they work kind of the same way. There's like a metal ring right at the top of the nozzle, and that adjusts whether it goes from 90 degrees to 180. It actually goes up to 210 degrees, and you just open it all the way up, close it down to 90, open it up to 210, and back and forth, and then they just start spraying better. And so that's one thing. Maintenance-wise, there's obviously you have to do maintenance on your sprinkler system. You can't just have a sprinkler system and never do anything and then expect that the lawn's just going to never have a dry spot and it's always going to be green. So one maintenance thing with the MP rotators is that spinning of that ring back and forth and just cleaning out of the screens. That goes for any sprinkler, especially the ones at the ends of the lines. And how do you know which ones are the end of the lines? You can turn the valve on and kind of watch the heads come on, or you can imagine where the valve is if you didn't install the sprinklers yourself, and kind of look at the runs, usually one side of the grass, other side, should be obvious, where the last head is the farthest one away from the valve, usually, not always, but, it just depends how it was installed. But you'll definitely know if it's been a year, 2 years, and you've never cleaned the screens. The dirtiest screen, I guarantee you, is the last head on the line. So, having said that, check the timers, check your coverage, clean the screens, spin the little filters. If they get too clogged where they're not working, just replace the nozzle. It's pretty cheap to replace just the nozzle. Check the seals. I know we've had other shows where we talk about the seals and the heads and the valves, and make sure nothing's leaking, that everything's working properly. Get to know those signs. If you walk around, you see silt coming up and sand and a little hole, in the grass or near a sprinkler head, probably have an underground leak, or maybe one of the fittings or something. A lot of times we use funny pipe fittings. If you know what that is, you don't know what it is, it's a flexible pipe. A lot of sprinkler heads are really easy to work on nowadays. So anyway, check it out, and make sure that your lawn is the best it can be for the least amount of money and water. So that's what we're all about. Now, I did want to go a little bit into pavers here. We're going to take a quick break here in a second, and then we'll talk more about it on the other side. But when it comes to doing your hardscaping up to your lawns, and, there's a lot of curves. We curve everything. So it's even the curves and the way things are shaped, and that includes the patio, the pavers, will affect the sprinklers and affect sometimes where you get dry spots or where the weak zones are, because we're not putting in squares for grass or circles, because a lot of the sprinklers spray in circular patterns. So I want to talk a little bit about pavers, the shapes of the patios and the borders and the patterns that we can use and all the different colors. So we'll be right back. If you miss any part of this show or want to hear any other shows, go to our YouTube channel, Chaparral Pavers, and check us out there. Also, the web, ilovetokomehome.com. I'll see See you on the other side of the break.
You're listening to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on California's Central Coast. Here on 1240 AM and 99.5 FM, KSMA.
This show is brought to you by Airval Block. Concrete paving stones or pavers are not all created equal. Airval Block pavers are created from a dry mix of gravel, sand, cement, and color. With very little water used, they're super strong. They won't crack or fade. And to be an Airval Block paver, the gravel and sand come from right here on the Central Coast, supporting our local community. Airval Block is the only local manufacturer of concrete masonry products like pavers, mortarless retaining wall blocks. Airval Block products are high quality for peace of mind, and there are many colors to choose from. And if you're not sure which products you need or how to use them, you will always get expert advice from the staff at Airval Block. Products made on the Central Coast for the Central Coast. Visit their fully landscaped outdoor showroom to see the many ways you can use Airval Block products at number 1 Suburban Road in San Luis Obispo, or go online at airvalblock.com.
If you're thinking about installing a new paver patio or paver driveway, check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Serving the Central Coast since 2001, Chaparral Pavers will work with you to get it right and complete the job to your specifications, as customer service is king at Chaparral Pavers. Paver driveways are stylish and durable and guaranteed to never crack. If your old concrete driveway or entryway is a hazardous cracking mess, it's time to call Chaparral Pavers. Go to their website, ilovetocomehome.com. You'll find all the information you need. Check out photographs of past installations and reviews from Central Coast residents who have used Chaparral Pavers. And don't forget, all installations are guaranteed for the life of your home. So check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetocomehome.com. Chaparral Pavers, they'll make you love to come home. Now, back to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on KSMA.
And we're back. Okay, we are talking about sprinklers and summertime schedules and preventing those dreaded dry spots. And really, the best way to do it is check your sprinklers ahead of time. Make sure there's no clogged nozzles. Make sure you've got the head-to-head coverage, and know your weak zones. Get to know that lawn. If you've just moved in and you haven't been there a complete year in a home yet, and it's a hot week during the summer, then get to know your lawn. And, every year it's going to be the same weak zones, same spots. And, really think about what you're programming there on your clock. Bring them back, those brown spots with the hose, not upping the sprinklers for a really long time. And chances are after that hot spell is over, you put a few more minutes maybe on the lawn stations, and you can always add more start times too. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but what I do is I always run my clock year round on 2 start times instead of 1. And there's really no difference other than there's more absorption into the soil, because if you're watering 10 minutes, you can do 2 start times at 5 minutes each start time, and you're still watering 10 minutes. You're just giving that soil time to absorb it. MP rotators, like what I was talking about earlier, automatically do it. They water really slow. You have to get used to longer run times. Longer run times don't always necessarily mean you're adding more water compared to other nozzles. So on the low flow heads, they give that soil time to water. You may not need the 2 start times as much. If you are running regular spray heads and you're putting out 2 gallons, 4 gallons a minute out, which is a lot of water really fast, take advantage of the multiple start times on your timer for sure. It's not that hard. Everything's available online now to figure out how to operate this clock, that clock. The Hunter Pro C is a great clock. Rain dials work pretty friendly, easy to use. Any of the number of the Rainbird products, try to stay with some, in that case, probably some good, well-named brands or well-used clocks, or just so that they're easy to program. Because some clocks, and I don't know if it's the bargain ones or even some more expensive ones I've seen, can be quite complicated to program, but you're better off, for a $50-$60, maybe $120 at the most, get a clock that you're comfortable with and you can work and use. Keep your yard looking beautiful and keep your water bill down as low as it can be and still have a nice landscape. So towards the end of the show there before the break, we were talking about a little bit about getting into pavers and how the paver shapes can affect the lawn. So if you're doing a brand new landscaping and you're marking out for your back patio and lawn's going to go in and you're marking out for your planters. And by the way, leave nice big planters too, please. When we go back to plant, if the planter spaces are already marked out or concrete's poured or, whatever borders are in, and you limit yourself, I don't know what the unwritten rule of you have to have a 3-foot planter along your lawn, between your fence and your grass. If you can make it 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7 feet, the bigger the planter is, if you have the space, the easier it's going to be to keep your plants without having to prune so much or hedging them back to keep them off the grass. So nice big planters. And then when you're making the shape for the patio, think about how that's going to affect the lawn. Try to keep the lawn in increments of the nozzles that you're going to be able to use. They make 8-foot nozzles. They make 12-foot, 15-foot, 18, and try to figure out where your head-to-head coverage is going to be, and then design the lawn around that. So, yes, you want beautiful shapes. Yes, we want curves, and sometimes sprinklers can be thought of last, but if at all possible, if there's a way to shave a foot off here or make an area slightly wider and you get that overspray from the sprinklers down, the better off you're going to be. So, yes, and of course you want nice big patios too, so it's always a balance. But think about the colors. You're going to get that dark green of the grass. You're going to get, the dark browns from the barks. Think about the colors of the pavers, how that's going to tie in. There's some beautiful patterns. You can do different colors and borders and tie in everything so it's all cohesive and works together. Awesome. So that's all the time we have today. Check us out on the web, ilovetocomehome.com. Check out our YouTube channel where we have all these radio shows there available for you at Chaparral Pavers on YouTube. So thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll see you next week.
This has been Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers. Go to ilovetocomehome.com to find out more or call 805-588-6917. And be sure and tune in next week at this same time for Patio Side Chats here on KSMA.